Well, the weather is certainly getting very wintry outside, but rain or shine, we're going to carry on with our examination of the collection here in the very Reverend William McMillan Library in Dunmurry. And today we're going to look at some books connected with one of the most prominent non-subscribing Presbyterians in history. In fact, the most prominent non-subscriber. In years gone by, when the Sunday school competitions were very big events, there was always a quiz for the older children. And one of the questions every year was the same. It was, who is known as the father of non-subscription in Ireland? And I hope everyone knows the answer. If you didn't know it, you might have been able to work it out from the title of this video, because the father of non-subscription in Ireland was the Rev John Abernethy. And we have his portrait hanging in the session room, and it's only right that it should be held there for everyone to see. But there's some little irony in having John Abernethy's portrait here in Dunmurry, because although Dunmurry was very much the forefront of the non-subscribing side of things at the time of the second subscription controversy, at the time of the first controversy, the minister here in Dunmurry, the Reverend John Malcolm, was opposed to John Abernethy. He went into print to oppose Abernethy and the other non-subscribers, and he even coined the term New Light to describe them. But John Abernethy was this preeminent non-subscribing Presbyterian, and not only non-subscriber, really the most preeminent Presbyterian minister of his day. And we have some of his books here in the library. So his books are behind me in the corner here, in the corner of what we call special collections. And appropriately enough, his books were the first to be catalogued when the catalogue began. So they're up in the top corner here. And basically, John Abernethy's books fall into four categories. They could be described as books which advocate the cause of non-subscription, or they are books of philosophy, or they are books which try to defend the rights of Presbyterians, or they are simply sermons. Now, most of his sermons, his pure sermons, were published after his death, and they relate the time when he was minister in Dublin. Abernethy was ordained a minister in Antrim in 1703 and eventually moved to Dublin in 1730. So his sermons on various subjects, as the book was titled, was published in 2 volumes, and these date from his time as minister in Dublin, and they're really moral or improving sermons, you can tell from the titles. And this is the London edition, published in 1748 in 2 volumes. And one of the important things about these volumes is there's also an extended obituary of John Abernethy, written by his successor in Antrim, James Duckle, published in the front of the first volume. Some of his earlier sermons were published in 1751. Now, we should say republished, because some of these dated back to 1716 or 1719, and they were reprinted again sometime after his death. And we have a copy here, not in brilliant condition, but nevertheless an important copy of some of John Abernethy's sermons. And this book was entitled Scarce and Valuable Tracts and Sermons, occasionally published by the late Reverend and learned John Abernethy MA, author of the Discourses on the Being and Perfections of God, now first collected together, London, 1751. And you can see from the contents page the variety of subjects that these dealt with. A lot of them were to do with the repeal of the sacramental test, which, as I mentioned, was one of the interests of Abernethy, this desire to protect Presbyterian or dissenting rights. And the other side is the start of his campaigning for non-subscription. So in this book is reprinted Religious Obedience Founded on Personal Persuasion, a sermon he first preached before the Belfast Society in 1719, a sermon in which he makes the case for relying solely on the Bible and for people's right to make their own minds up, to choose for themselves, to employ what he called the sacred right of private judgment, to use the God-given faculty of reason. So this collection ties in two of those aspects of Abernethy's writing, his non-subscription, and also his place at the forefront of defending Presbyterian rights. And the other aspect of his writing is indicated in the title of the book, because it describes him as the author of the Discourses on the Being and Perfections of God. And we have those books, we have those 2 volumes here as well. And they are examples of Abernethy as the philosopher. So we have the 2-volume set of the 3rd edition of Abernethy's Discourses concerning the Being and Natural Perfections of God, published in 1757, so sometime after Abernethy's death. And there were actually editions of this book published in London, as this one was, and also in Glasgow, and also in Aberdeen. And they were the best sellers of their day. They were particularly important in the Scottish universities and in the dissenting academies in England. They were used to train people preparing for the ministry of the Presbyterian Church. It was an essential book on the curriculum. And of course, Presbyterians couldn't go to university at Trinity College Dublin. They couldn't go to Oxford and Cambridge, but they could go to their own academies, which were set up to train ministers, and they could go to the universities in Scotland, particularly Glasgow and Edinburgh and Aberdeen and St Andrews. And that's where they trained. And in those institutions in the mid-18th century, Abernethy's books were required reading. So there we have them, the books of the Reverend John Abernethy. Important books for understanding the history of the 18th century, important books for understanding the role and place of Presbyterianism in Ireland, and particularly too of the development of non-subscribing Presbyterianism, of the development of the use of reason in religion. This was one of the central tenets of Abernethy's belief. And he was the father of non-subscription in Ireland, and his books here in our library were the first to be catalogued, appropriately enough. And we remember him as a very key figure, and we're very pleased to have his books on the shelves here in the very Reverend William McMillan Library.